Hey JavaScriptLA. So today I wanted to talk about Windows and basically my own journey with the transition from using a Mac computer, which I have been pretty much using for the last like 3 years, towards using Windows and just kind of getting myself acquainted with it again, after all this time. So you'll notice that I'm on my Windows desktop and basically I've got the same kind of color scheme that I always have in pretty much like all of my, JavaScript stuff. Like we've got this vaporwave kind of cool theme. And I don't know, like I mean like being a programmer, right? You kind of like are around like all kinds of memes and funny things, and I guess like it just sort of grows on you after a while. Um, you just kind of think to yourself, hey, like I like this pink and purple. It actually kind of is fun, right? So for me, like that's the first thing I always do, like when I take on something new, like some kind of like new thing that I'm going to learn, and just kind of own, right? Like I started customizing it and just really just playing around with the whole thing. So in the case of an operating system, right? Um, my whole thing too, right? And I guess I should preface this with like why the heck am I, using a Windows computer when I'm a Mac person? What the heck is all that all about? So, the last like few years, I had been thinking, I just feel like computer prices and, tech, it's like this constant thing where you're just upgrading and paying for new devices. And literally, I have so many of these devices on my desk. I have this, Fire tablet. I have, I think, the iPad, right? And then I have, this iPhone, and there's plenty of other stuff. You see my room. There's like so many different like devices in the room. Um, and I think like that's also my own fault. I've always been sort of a tech enthusiast and just really into like learning all kinds of like gadgets and being a wizard at all kinds of things. But I really feel like it's the money part, right? Like I feel like okay, every 2 years or 3 years with Apple, something brand new comes out, and in that case too, it's not necessarily brand new, but it's like just the newer computer, the newer phone, and it costs like literally 3 grand or 4 grand to basically have like the one that's actually like very good. Especially the computers, the iPhones. It's like we've gone from paying like around $500 to $600 for a phone to almost like $2,000. And again, you get what you pay for. I know there are options out there where you can buy like low end stuff, but typically like when you're buying like a computer or a phone, you want something that is going to last you quite a while, right? That's the expectation. You're not like, oh, I want to go and purchase this phone or a computer again in a year, because what's the point then, right? Like why spend so much money? And that's definitely the case with me. So to make a long story short, I had been thinking about this for quite a while, right? I had been thinking that I want to move away from, just being tied to one particular computer, one particular operating system. So I started looking at Windows, and I also started looking at Linux, right? And I really love Linux. I feel like it's such an easy system to use. It is slightly more complicated than Mac, but if you grew up on using Mac, then you should feel right at home with Linux. Windows, I have been using Windows way back, like probably since the 90s, right? When Windows 95 was like super popular. So I was like very, very into that at the beginning. Somewhere along the way, I would say maybe college, I just started to think that, I was bored of Windows. And so, I knew pretty much at that time, like I think around that era, it was probably Windows, I want to say Vista, maybe at that time, I'm not sure, but like I kind of felt like Windows Vista, Windows 7 era, I was just very much like, okay, yeah, boring, I want to learn something new. So I decided to take on Mac. And then pretty much after that, I just started going with Mac because I felt like it was a lot easier to do a lot of different things. And so I really fell in love with, Steve Jobs' version of Mac. But then, you know, that ecosystem has definitely matured, especially in the last like I guess like it's been I don't know since 2007 or 2008. That's when Steve Jobs. I'm not sure. I'm maybe like misrepresenting or the information, but I think that's when he passed away. Maybe it was like 2009. Um, but I would just say like after that, right? Like Apple kind of became more of a corporation, and every year like it was more about just making updates to the operating system and updates to the computer. But then each time there's an update, it was really just like hey, we're updating this, but we're going to charge you full price again to buy the new thing. And by the way, the old stuff's not going to work in another few years, right? And so you have a limited time to jump onto this. And so I started feeling like, this is annoying. Like I don't want to have to buy like new stuff every year or every few years, right? I want to actually, like I said, like I want to be able to have something that I know is going to last me for a while. And so ultimately, I started thinking, what if I could move away from the traditional idea of having, my software tied to my operating system? And that's kind of like the one thing that I want to show you here, right? Like in Windows, basically, like you can customize the colors, just like I've shown you here. You can customize the wallpaper, and then pretty much like in this day and age, you can download the same set of software apps that you would use on a Mac, right? And so I started thinking like, well, if I'm only using my Apple computer for these apps, right? Okay, there's some apps that are exclusive to Apple, especially like the Notes app, and I think iTunes, right? iTunes, for example, the iBooks, but the thing about Apple too that got me irritated over the last like 3 years, I would say, is that all of their own, native apps have just been extremely lackluster. Like lots of people have been complaining, including myself, about, features that need to be updated or fixed. And it just sort of fell on deaf ears, right? Rather than fix problems with, those particular apps. Like with Notes, for example, I think like the biggest issue that I had was that, I would save stuff to my notes, and then I would look at it on my phone, and the stuff that I had just saved would not like show up on my, phone's Notes app, or, like it would be delayed. Or if I looked at it on Windows, like if I try to write stuff on my Notes app, it would, essentially like have some sort of weird conflict with the other Notes app. And so like I'd have two versions of the same Note app, and it was just really like the little things that kind of bothered me. Like same thing with iTunes, right? Like, and iTunes is like a huge example of that, right? Like you have these playlists that you can curate, but every time Apple uses iTunes, right, or fixes iTunes, they break a whole bunch of features. And so it becomes like, oh, where's the music that I had downloaded all this time, or I put on my into these playlists? Like how come I can't find it anymore? Like Apple ruined my playlist, right? And so then it became this thing that I had to sort of relearn. And I just kind of felt like, okay, well, like if I'm making these playlists, and they're just going to go away after some time, then what's the point in even making them, right? So here I've got all these different playlists, and now what I did was I said, okay, like I'm going to try this app again, and I'm going to try like learn the new Apple Music, right? Or Apple iTunes. I guess it's still called iTunes on Windows, but Apple Music everywhere else, right? So here, I decided, okay, I'll just create some smart playlists. And basically, with the smart playlists, I think you just kind of have to configure them, and there are rules that you can use. So like here it says album must contain Disney in the album title, and then basically pull down. So that's actually a neat feature. But then like I can't really grab everything I want, from Disney genres, right? Because this thing is only going to look up album contains Disney. If I say, okay, I'm missing Aladdin in here, and I try to look up, maybe album contains Aladdin, right? And I press OK, suddenly all my files are gone, right? And I'd be like, well, why did that happen? What happened? What were the rules? I mean, like, I thought I was looking for Disney and Aladdin. Why did it completely... And then I think, oh, programming. This is an and condition here, right? So, oh, okay, it must contain Disney and Aladdin, not Disney or Aladdin, right? And so because when you look at it this way, it's like Disney and Aladdin, right? True. I have Disney, but I don't have Aladdin, false, and the whole thing's false, and so you get back no results. So little dumb things like that, right? People have been like, oh, well, can you fix this? And falls on deaf ears. There's a lot of like forum comments about it. So for me, like those are the things that kind of turned me off from Apple. It's just there's a whole lot. Like a lot of their native apps are like this, right? Like iCloud is another one that, just really for the longest time, like every other cloud provider, like one drop or something. I'm messing it up here. Dropbox, I know that OneDrive is what I want to say. That's Microsoft's thing. But Dropbox, OneDrive, I use pCloud, which I really like. But all of them, are superior to iCloud. I've been using a MacBook Pro 2017 for quite a while, and the keyboards on that, like they get really messed up after a while, and like they stop. I think like I had to take my Apple computer over to the Apple store a few times and basically, get them to fix the keyboard because like the keyboard would stop working, and then like they'd have to replace out the entire keyboard. Then they would tell me, in between like trying to get all the repairs done, they would say, "Oh, well, you just have too much dust here. Clean it. Here's how you clean your own keyboard," as if I was an idiot. And I'd be like, "No, well, that's not the actual problem. The keys are actually not responding the way they should be." And so like I had to, kind of work around that. But basically, yeah, even with the MacBook Pro, like there's like these issues where like suddenly the computer will get hot and pop, and so you'll hear like this like sort of like pop noise, and you'll think, what the heck happened with my computer, So it's just like it's crazy. You pay a lot for the Apple computers, and you just kind of like end up like with these computers that don't really last, or they don't have really great software. So long story short too with that, right, like it's not an Apple bashing session because I still really like Apple, but I feel like a lot of the stuff that I really enjoy about Apple can be enjoyed on other systems too. I mean, you can pretty much watch listen to iTunes now like on Windows, which I find is kind of odd given Apple's record of like always being closed system. But here it is, which I like. And if I didn't like Apple Music, I could switch to Spotify, and that's also an app that's universal to all the operating systems. Then one other thing too is that Apple doesn't really have any support for games like Xbox, and I think they have a Steam app, but it's not very full featured. So it's kind of like like if you're a gamer, if you want to play games, right, like really good games, you're kind of limited to the iTunes store where you can play kind of like sort of watered down games. Whereas with Steam, you get access to full like Xbox and PlayStation 4 level games, and even like Nintendo Switch games. So like I find that that's really fun, and I can use like my Xbox controller and just start playing games, which is pretty awesome. So hats off to the Windows team for integrating this in, and also the Steam team for making these games available. So that's pretty cool. Also like going back to the whole apps, right? Like for the most part, like I'm on Chrome, right? So, and I know like this is like the classic thing. Like a lot of people say, oh, you just use Chrome for any computer and you can watch your Netflix. You can, use Discord and Slack. They're pretty much universal. Facebook Messenger. Like if you are a programmer, you can use Visual Studio Code, or you can use Sublime Text, you can use Atom, you can use pretty much whatever you need. And then, like the thing about developers, right, for a long time, like I remember being around a lot of developers who were like, oh, Mac, you got to have the Mac. Mac is like so much easier for development. That's actually true if you enjoy command line, right? And so for the longest time, right, like command prompt wasn't very useful for doing fast development. But now with the Git bash integration that Windows has been sort of working on in the last few years, you pretty much can download all of the Unix commands and put them onto your command line. All you have to do is just download this from Windows, and then it'll essentially install all of the Linux style commands that you would use on a Mac for Windows. So I can type ls here and I can list out my directory, or I can type dir, which is the native Windows, right? You can also use different types of terminals. I know you can do that in Mac too, but you get PowerShell, which is a lot more fun to use, I think, in some ways, because you get a lot more features out of the box. You can also use like PowerShell commands. So this is kind of something fun to learn. And kind of going back to like, okay, in the old days when I was using Windows, I didn't really learn PowerShell. I didn't think it was that popular at that time. But what I did start doing with PowerShell recently is just kind of like going back and learning some of the old ways to do system administration. So I might do a video on that where I talk about a little bit of the PowerShell techniques. I think that might be kind of fun for Windows. But you can use PowerShell, and I think Visual Studio Code pretty much has it built into your editor, and so you can use it in the place of like your regular terminal. You can use commands like SSH and basically connect over to some remote box wherever you need and start doing web development. You can use PuTTY if you like, if that's what you prefer. So with Windows, you sort of still get like the old graphical way of doing stuff, and then you can also use like I know that kind of actually sounds funny coming from me, but you can also do a lot of like more cooler Unix style terminal stuff. And if you really do need a full-on Ubuntu Linux, you can also run a virtual machine on your Windows machine, and then basically here this would be the same as running a Linux from SSH. And so I actually prefer this because sometimes I'd be like, oh, okay, maybe I'll get a box on AWS, and just to try out Linux, I'll rent it for like $10 a month and like do some Linux stuff. You don't have to do that. You can just basically download this virtual machine, and like it runs really, really fast, and you can pretty much do your mock web development on here, and you can also do your mock web development on Windows, and you can compare the two and you can see which one you like better as far as like what you want to use for your next IT setup. So I like this a lot. And if you still want, I mean, you can go out there and rent AWS, and you can make this sort of like your stage or your local development, and then when you're ready you can push that to production, but it might save you some money, which is pretty cool. But yeah, kind of going back to like the topic of like the operating system in the future, what I'm really interested in, and I think Google was trying to do this, right? I'm not like suddenly like a Windows fan, right? By any means, like I actually am just kind of trying to like save money. And for me, like I feel like Windows is probably like the better route, because longer term, like even if my computer dies, right, Windows is pretty much like on every machine other than Apple. So if I want to buy like a new computer, I can buy a top of the line like Windows machine, and basically for 3K, right, I can have like a really, really great computer. Whereas if I buy a 3K Apple machine, I'm not sure if I'm going to get a great hardware and software experience, because Apple pretty much closes that and restricts that from me, and I have no control over how my computer deteriorates over the next several years, which is terrible. So for me, like already that's just more cheaper to just use Windows. I mean, like, even though I love Mac and I love the operating system, I just kind of feel like it's been stale for the last like 10 years, and I don't know where they're going unless by some means like their new stuff like just rocks, right? And even then, like Apple rocks typically at the beginning of their cycles when they're selling, but like over time, like it just kind of like stalemates, and then they don't really release anything awesome for like a few years, but you still end up paying premiums. That's kind of like the way I look at their cycles. Whereas Windows, you kind of do have like this constant innovation, because like they're just partly is they have to keep up with Apple, but at the same time like they're also trying different things, and you kind of get like previews to new features. So that's kind of another cool thing. But yeah, like for me, like I was talking about Google. I think like what they were trying to do was like they were trying to build the operating system into this Chrome bar. So like like I have apps here, right? Like this is the start bar in Windows. This is kind of like the start bar here too for Chrome. So it's like I can pick any of these apps that I use regularly, and just basically like just like I would use it on the desktop, I can use it in my Chrome. So that kind of makes it nice, because let's say I want to run a Linux operating system, and I probably need to show this at some point, like in a future video, and I probably will. It would be really cool if I could just sign in to my Chrome browser, right? And then my Chrome browser is something that works on all devices. So if I go into like my Chromebook or if I go into a Linux box, I can just open up Chrome, install Chrome, right? And then basically just run all my apps from this thing rather than having to set up all my operating system, because Chrome already remembers all my preferences. So this is actually like really, really useful. And actually that's what I kind of do anyway. Sometimes when I have to go to work and I'm working on my work PC, I'll just sign in with my Chrome account and then basically run all of the apps that I usually use, like a notepad. I think like they have a built-in code editor. You can use Carrot. They do have like a recording software, so if I wanted to record my screen, I can do that. I think like they're trying to bring games into the mix. I'll have more information on that at some other video. But you can also add like Messenger, you can add Slack, you can add Discord into your Chrome bar. So it's really useful in that way. And I feel like, again, like for me, like if that's the direction, that's the way I want to actually go. I think AWS, like Amazon, also has kind of like an edge in this race, because you can install virtual machines on their like AWS software, and you can run them. And I think you can even run the operating system on the virtual machine in the cloud. And so you get like a remote session where I think you can use RDP or so to basically just have like your operating system like running either on Windows 7 or Windows 10. You can also have like a Linux operating system running in the cloud, and then just basically you just run your your commands from shell, and then basically you can also use the graphical like window view. And I might show a demo of that someday, which is pretty cool too. But I think that's actually great, because that's like the next step. And then you kind of get to this point too with WebAssembly, right? And I'm going to try to get a talk on this, but I think like that's the direction of the future, is that a lot of these apps that you use on your operating system will eventually just be like, the website itself, right? So if you want to, look at Netflix, it doesn't matter if you're using Chrome, or it doesn't matter if you're using Firefox, it doesn't matter if you're using, Safari or something else, right? Like the experience is going to be exactly the same, because the software gets written in, a language like JavaScript, and then compiled down, or in some other language like C# or Java, and then compiled down into WebAssembly, which JavaScript then runs. And so you get the software out of the box experience instead of just a website that you're visiting. And so software runs no matter what browser you're using. It's the same experience. And I think Figma is a really good example of that. Figma.com is kind of like this software that you can run in the browser, but it's just like Photoshop or Sketch. I think Sketch is like a more appropriate. Maybe it's like what is it, InDesign, or I forget the name of all of Adobe software, but like there's one, I think it's XD, where like you basically can create like designs inside the browser. So I feel like that's really cool, right? Like I could save my work, and then if I don't have my main computer with me, I can go on to like using some other computer. So I guess like my point with all this is, right, like it doesn't matter what operating system you use in this day and age, and that's the way you should probably be moving forward, because a lot of the software that we use is portable on any machine that you want. And like for me, I'd rather save money than like constantly pay money for upgrades, especially when the upgrades are like maybe like less than 25% of an upgrade, right? Like if it's 100% upgrade, maybe I would pay the full price. But I feel like for Apple or even Windows, like to be asking for like more money, like when they haven't done like a good job of like changing the software, the hardware, that's just like ridiculous for me. I'd rather save my money and like save up for a real upgrade, and in the meantime like use something that's a little bit more agnostic. And so yeah, that's it. That's my little spiel on operating systems. And it doesn't matter if you're a developer, like you should be able to use like and do your development on any particular machine. Don't be a fanboy or a fangirl, be adaptable, be flexible, be able to work with all kinds of different operating systems, because in the future you may actually be doing a lot of your development just for the cloud, right? Like you may be just doing it for portability to work on every machine. And so you probably won't be tied to any specific device. All right. with that, I'm going to stop here. Thanks for watching. I'll see you at the next meetup, and have fun.